Evil Dead 2. Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2 took the scrappy cabin-in-the-woods cult classic and turned it into a wild horror comedy that many critics and fans say actually improves on the original. The Evil Dead in 1981 was a micro-budget shocker made for around $350,000 and became a cult hit for its relentless gore and DIY ingenuity. Evil Dead 2 in 1987, again directed by Sam Raimi and starring Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams, was produced for a larger budget of around $3.5 million, allowing more elaborate set pieces and special effects. Rotten Tomatoes lists Evil Dead 2 with an 88% approval rating from critics, and the site's consensus describes it as a comedy of terrors that improves on the original's formula by reimagining the story with a wilder horror comedy tone. The sequel essentially remakes the first act of The Evil Dead in its opening, then continues the story with Ash alone in the cabin as demonic forces toy with him, most famously in the laughing cabin sequence, where the mounted deer head and furniture cackle. Raimi leans hard into slapstick as Ash's possessed hand attacks him, leading to the chainsaw amputation and the iconic groovy moment, cementing Campbell as a horror icon. Critics and franchise retrospectives repeatedly rank Evil Dead 2 as the best-reviewed entry in the series, and the point where Raimi's hyperkinetic style and black comedy fully snap into place. Fan and critic discussions routinely describe Evil Dead 2 as far superior in craft, pacing, and entertainment value, even among those who still find the original scarier. This sequel succeeds by using more resources and a refined tone to reinvent its own story, proving how leaning into horror comedy and stylization can transform a rough, effective original into something more iconic and widely accessible. Bride of Frankenstein. Universal's 1935 Bride of Frankenstein is frequently hailed as one of the rare classic horror sequels that surpasses its legendary original. Frankenstein, in 1931, directed by James Whale and starring Boris Karloff as the monster, is a foundational horror film, but was constrained by early sound filmmaking and censorship. Bride of Frankenstein, in 1935, again directed by Whale with Karloff returning, expands the story immediately after the first film's ending, deepening the monster's loneliness and desire for companionship. The sequel introduces Dr. Pretorius, played by Ernest Thesiger, whose campy, sinister performance and homunculus mini-people sequence add dark humor and a more flamboyant tone. Modern genre histories cite Bride as a landmark horror sequel, often highlighting its richer themes of otherness, rejection, and blasphemy, alongside more elaborate production design. Many critics and fans argue Bride is a superior sequel in every aspect, praising its more complex emotional arc and iconic finale with the monster's line, "We belong dead." Horror essays and lists of best horror sequels almost always include Bride, sometimes citing it as the earliest example of a sequel widely seen as better than the original. This film proves that horror sequels have been outshining originals since the 1930s, demonstrating how amplifying themes, adding dark humor, and deepening a monster's inner life can elevate a simple gothic tale into one of horror cinema's canonical masterpieces. Scream 2. Wes Craven's Scream 2 took the meta-slasher hit and, according to Rotten Tomatoes and many critics, sharpened the formula into a sequel some rank above the original. Scream, in 1996, revitalized slashers with self-aware characters dissecting horror rules, earning strong critical and commercial success. Scream 2 in 1997 shifts Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, to college, with the Ghostface killings mirroring the release of an in-universe movie called Stab, based on the first film's events. Rotten Tomatoes editorial notes that Scream 2 currently holds the highest tomato meter score in the Scream franchise, edging out the original with an 81% critic rating. Commentaries and fan discussions credit Scream 2 with escalating the meta-commentary by directly interrogating whether sequels can surpass originals, a question this film itself is often used to answer yes. Critics highlight its more elaborate set pieces, including the opening cinema attack, the sound booth sequence, and the silent crawl over a knocked-out killer, alongside deeper exploration of media sensationalism and trauma. Gene Siskel famously reviewed the first Scream negatively, but praised Scream 2, contributing to its reputation as a smarter, more ambitious follow-up. This sequel stands as a rare slasher that directly addresses sequel fatigue, while also being held up as the series' high point, proving that self-awareness and smarter themes, not just higher body counts, can help a sequel outdo its originator. Dream Warriors. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, is often cited by fans as the franchise peak, with many calling it a stronger film than Wes Craven's original. A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984 introduced Freddy Krueger and dream-based kills, revitalizing slasher horror with a surreal premise. Dream Warriors in 1987, directed by Chuck Russell with Wes Craven returning as co-writer, brings back Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson, mentoring institutionalized teens who learn to fight Freddy inside their dreams. Fan polls and Reddit horror threads frequently list Dream Warriors as their favorite Elm Street entry, praising its ensemble of memorable teen characters and inventive dream powers. Critics credit Dream Warriors with balancing darker horror and imaginative fantasy, expanding Freddy's mythos without collapsing fully into camp, as later sequels did. The film introduces iconic imagery like the puppet veins sequence and the TV kill with the line, "Welcome to Prime Time," which became series-defining moments often mentioned more than kills from the original. Articles about horror sequels that outshine the original commonly include Dream Warriors for refining the tone and giving Freddy a more distinct personality while still being scary. This third film evolved a slasher franchise into its most beloved form, demonstrating how richer character ensembles and mythos expansion can push a concept beyond a one-off nightmare. Jason Lives. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is widely regarded as the best of the Friday sequels, and, for many fans and some historians, the moment the series finally becomes what people think Friday the 13th is. The original Friday the 13th in 1980 is a whodunit summer camp slasher where Mrs. Voorhees is the killer and Jason's hockey mask persona does not exist yet. Jason Lives in 1986, written and directed by Tom McLaughlin, resurrects Jason as an explicitly undead, superhuman killer after the divisive imposter Jason of Part 5. The film's critical summaries note that Jason Lives was the first Friday sequel to receive generally positive mainstream reviews and has become a fan favorite. Genre outlets highlight Jason Lives as the quintessential Friday movie, combining gothic visuals, rock song needle drops including Alice Cooper, and meta-humor that predates Scream's self-awareness. The opening graveyard resurrection, the RV crash, and the underwater climax are repeatedly singled out as some of the franchise's best staged sequences. Reddit and fan essays routinely call it the best in the franchise, praising its balance of genuine scares and tongue-in-cheek comedy, alongside its more sympathetic final girl and proactive Tommy Jarvis. This sequel demonstrates how leaning into supernatural mythology and self-aware fun can rescue a slasher series from fatigue, becoming the first Friday film people cite when arguing that a late franchise sequel can actually be the most enjoyable entry. Purge Anarchy. The Purge Anarchy took a cramped home invasion concept and expanded it into a full-blown urban nightmare that many critics and fans agree finally delivered on the franchise's premise. The Purge, in 2013, used its one night of legal crime idea mostly for a single-house siege thriller, leaving many viewers feeling the social concept was underused. The Purge Anarchy, in 2014, directed again by James DeMonaco, moves the action into Los Angeles streets, following multiple characters including Frank Grillo's vigilante sergeant trying to survive outdoors during the Purge. Articles on horror sequels better than the original emphasize that Anarchy explores the wider class and political implications of the Purge, including death squads and wealthy elites hunting the poor for sport. A list based on Rotten Tomatoes notes that The Purge's critic score is beaten by every sequel, with Anarchy's tomato meter significantly higher than the original. Genre outlets call Anarchy the sequel that showed audiences the real Purge, arguing it transforms a neat premise into a richer dystopian world, and delivers more dynamic action and varied threats. Reddit horror threads frequently list Anarchy among sequels that clearly outperform their originals in both scope and tension. This sequel exemplifies what happens when a follow-up does what audiences wished the original had done, proving that expanding geography and socio-political themes can turn a wasted premise into a genuinely compelling horror action franchise. By the way, if you are enjoying this type of content, I create videos like this all the time. I would really appreciate a subscribe. Final Destination 2. Final Destination 2 cranked up the Rube Goldberg mayhem so effectively that many reviewers and fans argue it is a better, more entertaining film than the original. Final Destination introduced Death's invisible design through a doomed group of plane crash survivors, focusing more on paranoia and rules discovery than spectacle. Final Destination 2 in 2003 opens with the now infamous highway pileup involving a logging truck, often cited as one of horror's most memorable opening disaster sequences. 2025 Retrospective notes that Final Destination 2 is a better film than its predecessor, praising tighter pacing and more elaborately staged kills tailored to the franchise's core audience expectations. User reviews and horror commentary repeatedly describe Final Destination 2 as better than the original, citing more likable characters, more creative deaths, and improved tension between set pieces. The sequel explicitly ties back to survivors of the first film, using Clear Rivers, played by Ali Larter, and the Tony Todd Mortician cameo to deepen the mythology and sense of continuity. Listicles about improved horror sequels often include Final Destination 2 as the moment the series found its true identity of elaborate, darkly comic cause-and-effect death scenes. This sequel works by leaning fully into the premise's most outrageous element, in this case absurdly intricate accidents, proving how a bigger, bloodier approach can create a follow-up many genre fans prefer over a more restrained original. Annabelle Creation. Annabelle Creation not only outperforms the first Annabelle on every critical metric, but it is also often cited as one of the best films in the entire Conjuring universe. Annabelle in 2014, a spin-off from The Conjuring centered on the haunted doll, was critically panned, with Rotten Tomatoes scores around 29% and reviews calling it dull and derivative. Annabelle Creation in 2017, directed by David F. Sandberg, serves as an origin prequel set years earlier, following a doll maker and his wife who shelter orphan girls in a farmhouse where Annabelle's evil is unleashed. Ahead of release, multiple outlets reported Creation holding a rare 100% Rotten Tomatoes score from its first wave of reviews before it later stabilized in the mid-70s, still far above the original's 29%. Write-ups call Creation a much better film, and even the franchise's greatest effort to date, noting that its score temporarily eclipsed The Conjuring at 86% and The Conjuring 2 at 80%. Horror forums frequently state that Creation is way better than Annabelle 1, praising its stronger main characters, including the orphan girls and nun, better set pieces, including the dumbwaiter, the scarecrow, and the bedroom sequences, and more cohesive script. Reviews highlight Sandberg's knack for visual scare construction, borrowed from Lights Out, and Creation's willingness to be meaner and more intense than a typical studio prequel while still operating within a PG-13 framework. Box office and franchise commentary note that Creation's positive reception rehabilitated the Annabelle label, encouraging further spin-offs and helping sustain the Conjuring verse as a long-running horror brand. This sequel represents an objective triumph where critics, audiences, and box office performance all point to a follow-up that dramatically corrects a weak original, proving how horror franchises can turn even their most derided sub-brands into reliable anchors with the right creative team. 10 Cloverfield Lane. 10 Cloverfield Lane quietly arrived as a spiritual sequel and ended up being widely regarded as a tighter, better film than the original Cloverfield. Cloverfield in 2008 used found footage style to depict a giant monster attack on New York, and was praised for marketing and scale, but criticized by some for thin characters and nausea-inducing camera work. 10 Cloverfield Lane in 2016, directed by Dan Trachtenberg, relocates the action to a bunker where Michelle, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, is held by doomsday prepper Howard, played by John Goodman, who insists the outside world is contaminated. Rotten Tomatoes ranks 10 Cloverfield Lane higher than Cloverfield, with the sequel earning a mid-90s critic score compared to the original's high 70s to low 80s range. Reviews call it a tight, tense thriller carried by powerhouse performances from Goodman and Winstead, praising its character focus and claustrophobic suspense over spectacle. Film discussion threads overwhelmingly trend toward preferring 10 Cloverfield Lane, calling it a better acted movie with better characters and more interesting themes, even among people who like the original. Critics note that it mostly works as a standalone chamber thriller, with the late film connection to the Cloverfield universe often described as the weakest part, underscoring how strongly the core story stands on its own. This sequel demonstrates how an anthology-style follow-up can outperform its blockbuster predecessor by trading shaky cam chaos for sustained psychological tension, becoming a frequently cited example of how horror-adjacent franchise entries do not need direct plot continuity to surpass the original. VHS 2. V/H/S2 is widely seen as a sharper, more consistent found footage anthology than the first V/H/S, to the point that many say it outright outdoes the original. V/H/S in 2012 revived the horror anthology in found footage form, but drew criticism for uneven segments and a weak wraparound story. V/H/S2 in 2013 keeps the anthology format, but features stronger standout shorts like Safe Haven, Phase 1 clinical trials, and a ride in the park. Reviewers explicitly call V/H/S2 a vast improvement and a better movie than the first virtually across the board, citing better pacing and more engaging stories. Threads note that V/H/S2 has higher user ratings, around 6.4 versus 5.7, reflecting audience preference. This anthology sequel refines the format and segment quality to deliver what fans wanted the first time, making it the go-to recommendation, with Safe Haven as the killer segment that alone convinces many viewers the sequel is superior. Child's Play 2. Child's Play 2 amps up Chucky's presence and ends with an unforgettable Toy Factory finale, leading many horror fans and writers to argue it is the ultimate Chucky movie. Child's Play, in 1988, holds an important place as Chucky's debut, but withholds full-on killer doll action for much of its runtime, playing more like a mystery. Child's Play 2 in 1990 moves Andy into foster care and brings Chucky back earlier and more often, emphasizing his personality and set-piece kills. A feature titled 5 Reasons Child's Play 2 is Better Than the Original argues it offers the definitive Chucky experience, with more emphasis on the doll and sharper pacing. Fans single out the Toy Factory climax, with industrial assembly line carnage, as one of the series' greatest sequences. This sequel improves by shifting focus from a slow-burn mystery to the killer icon himself, creating a franchise entry that feels like the definitive version in fan memory, delivering more Chucky sooner and wilder with the Toy Factory showdown as the visual centerpiece. If you found this valuable, consider subscribing so you never miss new content. Thanks for watching.